He's just an HVAC guy. He fixes other people's air conditioning for a living. That's what my brother-in-law said about me at a black-tie dinner for 300 people at the Langford Hotel in downtown Houston, and he said it loud enough that the couple at the next table turned to look. He said it with a little laugh, the kind that's supposed to take the edge off but doesn't, and then he went right back to his conversation like I wasn't standing 4 feet away holding a glass of sparkling water I hadn't touched. My name is Shane. I'm 37 years old. My hands are rough and my fingernails never quite come fully clean, and I'd shown up that night in the one good suit I keep in the back of my closet for occasions like this, and my brother-in-law, Bryce, took one look at me and did what Bryce always does. He filed me under someone not worth the room. My wife, Kara, was standing right next to me when he said it. She heard every word, and she laughed a little too. Not a mean laugh, I want to be fair about that. A nervous laugh. The kind you make when someone says something you know is off, but you're not sure how to respond without starting something. And then she turned slightly away from me, and I felt that turn the way you feel a cold draft when a door opens somewhere else in the house. I didn't say anything. I took a sip of my water and looked out at the room. But I need to back up, because nothing that happened that night means what it needs to mean unless you understand how we got there and who I actually am. And I'll warn you, it's not what you'd expect from a man Bryce had written off as a repairman. Bryce is 32. He works in private equity. He went to Vanderbilt, wears shirts that are dry clean only, and speaks in the kind of measured confidence that sounds like authority until you realize it's just practiced tone. He's not a cruel person, not in any way I could point to directly. What he is a man who categorizes people quickly and completely and never revisits the file. He decided who I was the first time he met me at a Christmas dinner 5 years ago when I showed up after a 14-hour day on a job site and forgot to change my work boots. He's never updated that file since. His firm, Westbrook Capital, had been working for 8 months to close a financing deal on a major industrial development outside of Houston, a $500 million logistics campus that was supposed to anchor an entire commercial corridor, the kind of project that makes careers. The dinner at the Langford was a client appreciation event for the development group, designed to make investors feel settled about where their money was going. Bryce had brought Kara and me along because his boss had said something about the value of showing family stability, and Kara had asked me to come, and I'd said yes because she rarely asks for things like that, and I love her. I didn't know, walking into that ballroom, that the deal Bryce had staked his quarter on was connected to me in any way. I did know it because Bryce had never once asked me what I did beyond fix his HVAC. He had never asked the name of my company. He'd never asked what kind of clients I worked for or what the work actually involved, because men like Bryce don't investigate the people they've already categorized. Why would you? The file is closed. So I walked into that room, and the room was full of people in expensive clothes doing expensive people things, and Bryce spotted someone he wanted to impress and pulled us over, and that's when he made his introduction. This is my sister Kara and her husband Shane. He's in the trades, actually. He's just an HVAC guy, fixes other people's air conditioning for a living. He said it with the relaxed smile of a man offering a simple explanation, not delivering an insult, just filing me for the room. And I looked at Kara, and she gave me that small, apologetic expression she has, the one that means I know, I'm sorry, just let this go, and she looked away. And I let it go. I went and found a spot near the bar and ordered sparkling water and watched the room. Here is who I actually am. My full name is Shane Whitmore. I grew up in Beaumont, Texas, with my father, who was a pipe fitter at a refinery for 31 years, and my mother, who waitressed at a diner called Dots until she was 64. We were not a wealthy family by any measure. I was not a college-bound kid. I graduated high school, spent 6 years in the Army, combat engineer, 3 deployments, which means I built things in places where things had a habit of blowing up, and came home when I was 24 with steadier hands than I probably deserved and a very clear picture of what actually mattered in the world and what didn't. I got into HVAC work because a friend of my father's gave me a chance, and because I found out quickly that I had something for mechanical systems, the same instinct I'd had for explosive ordnance and bridge construction in the Army, a feeling for how things work beneath what the manual describes, how metal behaves under stress, how airflow and pressure interact in ways the textbook explains but doesn't capture, how a system will tell you what it needs if you have the patience and the experience to listen. I spent 4 years as a technician, got licensed, started taking on commercial work, and then 8 years ago I started Whitmore Industrial Systems. I want to be precise about what that company is because people hear HVAC company and picture a service van and 2 guys in residential maintenance calls, which is fine work and nothing to be ashamed of. That's not what we do. Whitmore Industrial is a specialized mechanical systems contractor. We design, build, and maintain precision climate control and process cooling systems for industrial and commercial facilities, data centers, pharmaceutical manufacturing plants, food processing operations, and a handful of government facilities I'm not fully at liberty to name. The work requires engineering-level precision and a standard of reliability that most contractors never encounter, because in the facilities we service, a system failure is not an inconvenience. It is a multi-million-dollar loss event, or it is something worse. We have 63 employees. We operate across 7 states. I hold long-term maintenance contracts with 4 Fortune 500 companies and 2 federal agencies. The company's revenue last year was just under $18 million. Bryce thought I fixed air conditioning. I had never corrected him, not once in 5 years, because every time I considered it, Kara would catch my eye with that particular look, "Please don't." And I decided she was worth more to me than the satisfaction of watching her brother recalibrate. That's not nobility, that's just math. She has been my person since I was 29 years old, and she is worth more than winning an argument at a holiday dinner. But Bryce had never asked, not once. He'd looked at my hands and my worn boots and made his determination and never opened the drawer again. In 8 years he had not once said, "Hey Shane, what kind of work does your company actually do?" I'd gotten more genuine curiosity from the guy who mows our lawn than from my wife's brother. There was one Thanksgiving that still sits with me. Bryce had just been promoted to senior VP of something, and the family was celebrating, and someone asked me what we'd been working on lately. Before I could answer, Bryce jumped in with, "Oh, Shane's been slammed this fall, right? Lots of AC calls after that heat wave." He said it warmly, like he was being helpful. We had just completed a $4.2 million cooling infrastructure project for a pharmaceutical manufacturer in Pearland. 4 months of precision installation work, a system that had to maintain tolerances within fractions of a degree, because if it didn't, batches worth millions were compromised. I was prouder of that project than almost anything I'd done since my last deployment. I ate my turkey and said nothing because Kara was watching me with those eyes, and I love her. Now, the dinner. About 40 minutes into the evening at the Langford, the program started, and Kara and I found our seats at a table near the middle of the room. Bryce had positioned himself up closer to the front. I didn't mind. I had good food in front of me, and the man next to me turned out to be a retired structural engineer who'd spent 20 years working on large-span bridges, and he was one of the more genuinely interesting people I'd spoken to in months. And then the door to the ballroom opened, and a man walked in, and something in the energy of the room shifted the way it does when someone who is actually important enters a space. He was maybe 58, 60, solid build, the kind that comes from years of physical work that didn't fully disappear when the work stopped. He had a military bearing I clocked immediately. You always know it when you see it. Silver hair, good suit, the easy confidence of a man who didn't need anyone in the room to confirm his standing. His name was Leonard Cahill. I had known Leonard Cahill for 9 years. He was the founder and CEO of Cahill Development Group, one of the most respected industrial real estate developers in the Gulf Coast region and the Southeast. We had worked together on 3 major projects over 6 years. The last one was a $6 million data center expansion in San Antonio that had come in ahead of schedule without a single significant delay. When it was done, Leonard had called me personally and said, "Shane, I want Whitmore on everything we do going forward." We still played golf twice a year. He had met Kara at a project celebration dinner 2 years ago and told her she'd married a man who understood what it meant to do a job right. Leonard Cahill was also, I would understand about 15 seconds later, the lead developer on the logistics campus that Bryce's firm was trying to finance. And Whitmore Industrial had been in preliminary conversations with Leonard's project team about that same development for 3 months. Bryce didn't know any of that. Bryce had never asked what my company was called. Leonard walked into that ballroom and scanned it the way men who've spent their lives building things always scan a space, looking for what's actually there, not just what's supposed to be there. And then his eyes found me, and his face did something that made the people at my table turn to see what he was looking at. He crossed the room with the unhurried directness of a man who always knows exactly where he's going, came to our table and put his hand out. "Shane Whitmore, I'll be damned, I didn't realize you'd be here tonight." I stood up and shook his hand. "Leonard, good to see you." He looked at Kara and said, "You must be Shane's wife. I'm Leonard Cahill. Your husband has saved me a significant amount of money and more than a few headaches over the years." Kara said something polite. I couldn't tell you what exactly, because I was watching Bryce. Bryce was 40 feet away at the front table, and I could see from the reaction of the men sitting with him that Leonard Cahill walking into the room was a significant event in itself. I watched one of them say something to my brother-in-law. I watched Bryce turn to look toward Leonard, and I watched the exact moment, I caught it clearly from where I was sitting, When Bryce saw who Leonard was standing beside and what Leonard's body language was saying, and something in Bryce's expression shifted from recognition to processing to a particular kind of slow-building dread. Leonard stayed at our table for about 10 minutes. He told me how the logistics campus project was shaping up. He mentioned, and I believe he did this deliberately, because Leonard Cahill did not become Leonard Cahill by missing what was in front of him, that he'd been frustrated with the financing timeline dragging on, that he was eager to get the mechanical systems scope finalized, that he'd already told his project team Whitmore Industrial was the contractor he wanted on the job. That part, he said, is non-negotiable from my end. He said it at a normal conversational volume. The couple at the next table heard it clearly. I am fairly certain the retired bridge engineer beside me heard every word. Then Leonard stood up, excused himself, and made his way toward the front of the room. He stopped briefly at Bryce's table on the way, because Leonard is a man who knows how to work a room without making it look like work. I watched him lean down and say something short to Bryce. Bryce nodded once. Leonard moved on. Kara asked Leonard later that evening what he'd said. He'd asked Bryce whether he'd had a chance to connect with me about the project scope, specifically whether Whitmore Industrial was confirmed as the mechanical contractor, because without that locked in, Leonard had told him the financing timeline wasn't going to hold. Your brother-in-law, Leonard had said, right there at your table, the man I've been trying to pull into this deal for 2 months. I want to be careful about what happened after that, because I found these things become more dramatic in the retelling than they were in reality, and I made a promise to myself a long time ago to tell the truth about the things that happened to me. Bryce didn't get fired that night. There was no document slid across a table. What happened was quieter and I think more lasting. The deal stalled, not because I did anything, I had no reason to, and our company stood to benefit from that project regardless of how Bryce fared, but because the story had a shape that traveled. The very specific, nearly unbelievable picture of Bryce introducing the critical contractor to the room as just an HVAC guy, while that contractor's longtime client walked across the ballroom to shake his hand, does not stay a secret in a tight industry. People talk in parking lots after evenings like that. The story has a shape that people remember and repeat. I heard from Leonard 3 weeks later that Westbrook had been quietly reassigned off the primary position on the financing, not terminated, moved. The story Leonard told me with careful neutrality was that leadership had decided to rotate the relationship management. That's the language they use. I made exactly 0 calls. I reached out to no one. I want to be clear about that because I have no interest in pretending I'm something I'm not. I went home that night and sat on my back porch with a beer and thought about my father, who spent 31 years as the man at the table who didn't belong, who knew his worth without needing a room to confirm it. I thought about him more than I thought about Bryce. Kara and I talked that night for a long time, longer and more honestly than we'd talked in a while. She sat across from me at the kitchen table with a mug of tea going cold, and she had the look she gets when she's working through something real. Not the social expression, not the polished one, but the real face underneath it, the one I fell in love with when I was 29. She said I should have said something. I told her she didn't need to. She said, Shane, I looked away. When he said it, I turned away from you. I understood exactly what she meant. I had felt that turn, that small, involuntary step away, like a cold draft in a warm room, and she knew I had felt it, and that was the thing between us that needed to be said more than anything Bryce had done. I told her the truth. I told her it had stung, not because of Bryce. I had long since accepted Bryce's limitations as a human being, but because she had been standing right there and she hadn't. And she sat with that for a moment without immediately explaining it away or defending herself, which is one of the things I have always respected most about her. She can hold hard things and look at them. She said, I've done that before with your work stuff, your company stuff. I've let him set how he frames you and I've just gone along with it. She had, not out of cruelty, not intentionally, but she'd spent years defaulting to her brother's social framing, which meant defaulting to his read of me, and that small habit of deference had cost us something neither of us had fully named until that kitchen table at midnight. We are still married, solidly. More solidly than before, if I'm being straight with you, because that conversation cleared something between us that had been sitting there quietly getting heavier for years without us seeing the weight. Bryce called me about a week after the dinner. I'll give him credit. He wasn't fumbling on the phone, no stumbling over apology, no running away from it. He said he'd been an idiot. He said he'd made assumptions he had no right to make and that he was embarrassed by them. And then he asked me, with enough sincerity that I believed it, if I'd be willing to tell him more about what my company actually does. So I told him. I told him about the pharmaceutical plants and the data centers and the government work I'm cleared to mention. I told him about the San Antonio project. I gave him the revenue number, which I almost never do in social settings because I've found it changes conversations in ways that don't interest me. He was quiet for a moment after I said it. Then he said, "I never once asked, did I?" I told him no, he never had. He said, "That's on me." And it was. Entirely, I told him I accepted that, and I meant it, because I am not a man who finds much use in carrying grudges. Grudges are expensive and the return is terrible. My father told me that when I was 19 years old, and in 18 years of living it out, I have not found a single exception to the rule. Bryce and I are not close. I don't expect we ever will be, because we are genuinely different kinds of men who want different things from a life, and that's a fine thing to accept. But we are civil in a way that is honest now instead of polished, and that is more than I had before the Langford dinner. Here is the thing I keep coming back to, and I'll be quick, because I think it matters more than anything else in this story. Bryce called me just an HVAC guy, and in the most literal sense he wasn't wrong. That is what I am. I am a man who understands mechanical systems, air and heat and pressure, and the behavior of metals under real-world conditions, at a level most people never bother to develop, and I have spent 8 years building a company around that understanding. But in the most literal terms, I am the HVAC guy. What Bryce got catastrophically wrong was the word just. There is no just in mastery. There is no just in being genuinely skilled at something genuinely hard. There is no just in building a company from zero, in employing 63 people and their families, in delivering work that major companies trust with their most critical operations. There is no just in 6 years of Army service and 3 deployments in hard places. When you call someone just anything, you are not describing them. You are describing the ceiling of your own imagination. You are saying, "I have already decided this person is not worth investigating," and then proving it by never investigating them. My brother-in-law spent 5 years not asking me a single real question about my life, and it cost him. I have been guilty of the same thing in other directions, I know that. There are people I have filed and closed over the years, people I made fast assessments about and never returned to, and at least some of them are carrying entire lives and depths I never bothered to see. I think about that, and it keeps me from getting too comfortable with what happened at the Langford. But I want you to sit with this. If you take anything from what I've told you, the quiet man by the bar is not necessarily the least interesting man at the party. The rough hands and the plain clothes and the absence of an impressive title don't tell you what they appear to tell you. I have met men with more revenue than most people will see in a lifetime who looked like they'd just stepped off a job site because they had. I have met veterans who could not mention a single thing they'd done in uniform, not because they hadn't done anything, but because they weren't allowed to talk about it. I have met farmers who understood more about hydrology and futures markets and long-horizon thinking than any business school teaches. The people who assume the most tend to know the least, and the people who ask the real questions, "What do you do? What have you built? What do you know?" those people walk away richer from every single conversation. I am just an HVAC guy. I fix other people's air conditioning. I also maintain critical systems for pharmaceutical plants and federal facilities. I own a company that employs 63 people and their families, and I spent 6 years of my life serving in uniform building things in places where the cost of getting it wrong was not something you could recover from. All of that is equally true, and exactly none of it would have been visible to a man who'd already decided what I was and closed the file. If there is someone in your life you've filed under just something without ever really asking, a coworker, a neighbor, a family member who showed up in worn boots, I'd ask you one thing. Go back and look again. Ask a real question. Not a social question, a real one. You might be genuinely surprised by what you missed. And if you are the man standing off to the side, holding your drink, letting somebody introduce you wrong to the whole room while you wait quietly for the evening to sort itself out, I see you. The work is real even when the recognition isn't. The room has a way of figuring things out eventually. That's all I've got tonight. If it meant something, hit subscribe and I'll see you at the next one.